right? We're showing the continuity class, right? During this section, we've been talking about things like founding ideals, right? We've been talking about the Constitution and the reality of the Constitution. We've been talking about federalism and that structure and what that means in terms of, how we participate, civil liberties, civil rights. And then we're coming back to this with civil rights, and I want you guys to think about the fact that there were some promises made early on. Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. He's going to denounce slavery as a cruel war against human nature in the original draft of the Declaration of Independence. But even there was a compromise. We talked about the compromises in the Constitution, right? But there were compromises in the Declaration as well. James Madison is going to denounce slavery at the Constitutional Convention as the most oppressive dominion ever exercised by man over man. But the Constitution not only protected slavery, it created a very clear second class of citizen. And citizen, of course, was not what I would apply to you if you were a slave at that time. Second class of person, which again goes against those founding principles that Jefferson talks about, that all men are created equal. All other major figures of the founding are going to denounce slavery, but why are these compromises in there? The truth of equality and justice for all will be borne out in a short time. That's what Jefferson thought. Hey, look, we'll get started. People will realize, because we'll become more self-aware, we'll take these principles to heart, and we'll fix it, right? You just need to get this Constitution, this government going, and then we'll have the means to do something about it. There'll be a framework. Jefferson also felt that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. He could do, if we don't, in 50 years, there'll be another revolution. And we'll fix it, a civil war. It took 100. Alright. So, the ideals are going to persist, but oppression remains. So we have Frederick Douglass in the 1850s and 60s saying the natural rights principles of the Declaration of Independence. Remember this idea from Locke that natural law means that there must be natural rights, right? Okay? And so Frederick Douglass is referring to that. He says these natural rights principles that are in the Declaration of Independence are universally and permanently true whether we acknowledge them or not. The everlasting glory of America's founding lay in its dedication to these principles. The reason why the United States can be great is because we're going to dedicate ourselves to these principles, and that the salvation of our nation lies in its rededication to them. Frederick Douglass says America has the capacity to secure justice for all, irrespective of race, color, sex, or creed. In 1850, he says there's a history of oppression. No right to vote, no representation, no say in laws to which that person submits. Considered property, no right to private property, no right to education. So, civil rights movement, okay? Civil rights are positive acts governments take to protect against arbitrary or question of the distinction between those two, right? It is not the same, it's not liberties and rights, okay? Positive act that government takes to correct the wrong, essentially. Movements are actions taken by groups and individuals to urge government action on a civil liberties or discriminatory public policy issue. Today, how many of you are aware there's a walkout going on? And you're still here. All right, and tomorrow there's a protest. Specifically over what? COVID guidelines, right? The lack thereof. Okay? Students are saying specifically what? The government, in this case the University of Oklahoma, is not doing what? Their job. Taking care of their students or citizens. Okay? This is a movement, right? A protest. Even one step in the movement. Okay? Thank you. Before the Civil War, there's slavery that exists in the United States almost from its inception. From the inception of the United States, but almost from the inception of the colonies in the Americas. But the abolitionist movement begins at the time of the Revolution. In the 1760s, 1770s. At that point, the South is dependent on cheap slave labor. And then the North, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, had all passed black codes by 1804 that prohibited free black persons from settling, being seen in public, or voting in their states. So it's not just the South. In 1808, Congress is going to ban the slave trade. Why did it take until 1808? Compromise built into the Constitution. It said that the slave trade cannot be banned for 20 years. As soon as that 20 years was up, Congress banned it. Okay? But they did not ban slavery. They banned the trade. In 1820, Missouri is going to apply for admission as a slave state. So the abolitionist movement is going to fade after that. They're like, we've worked really hard and we've done this. We're tired. Okay? And so you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see that things go forward and they go back in history. And it's frustrating. They go forward, they go back. They go forward, they go back. Martin Luther King Jr. would say that the arc of justice is long, but the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But he says it's long. And when you are 20 years old, you don't know what long is. I'm 50. I don't know what long is. It's long. In 1820, Missouri is going to apply for admission as a slave state. Admission would give slave states the majority in the Senate. You guys, when we talk about the Senate, we talk about this in terms of state representation, right? That states have more power because of the Senate and the Electoral College than do the people. And so this is a big deal. The industrial North was like, we can't change the balance of power like that. And so we have the Missouri Compromise that's going to limit slavery to below the 36th latitude. And it's going to enter Maine as a free state on its own. Maine at that time was a part of Massachusetts. Good job, guys. So the abolitionist movement's going to restart. They're going to say, we were tired, but we got work to do. And the women's movement's going to begin as a result of this. In 1833, we have the American Anti-Slavery Society, and it's founded by William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They're also going to be the key lecturers. Women are the backbone of this organization. There are 3 women to every man who are working in this organization. And as they go from place to lecture, they're stopped because they're not allowed to travel without a male chaperone. They're not allowed into exclusive clubs. There's some hotels that bar their entrance. And women go, wait a second. We're not so free either. And so the Seneca Falls Convention of Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. And that list of grievances, again, no right to vote, no right to raise your children, no say over the laws to which you must submit, and property of either your father or your husband, or if your father dies and you're unmarried, your brother or uncle if you don't got one. Okay? In 1857, the case Scott versus Sanford is heard. This is really a ignition. The U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice Taney is going to rule that persons of color are not U.S. citizens. There is absolutely zero basis for this in the Constitution. Went on to say that Congress could not legislate slavery issues. It's going to create the precedent that democratic ideals are only for white men. The Emancipation Proclamation. So Taney's going to, with Scott versus Sanford, really cause an uproar in the North. People start lobbying very hard for change to the Constitution, for change in the law. And so, fearing that slavery would be ended by the abolitionist legislative movements, the South chooses to secede. To be noted, absolutely no laws have been put into place. The South secedes to protect slavery. During the Civil War, which ensues after the South secedes, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all slaves within any state or designated part of the state then in rebellion shall be thenceforward and forever free. He did this for a couple of reasons. He made it a moral issue, very clearly. This is about slavery. Words matter. But it did not free slaves that were in states that had not seceded. Following the Civil War, there are 3 amendments that are passed and ratified by the states. In order for states that had been in rebellion to re-enter the United States, they had to sign on. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. But the South starts using those black codes that were used in the North prior to the Civil War, for 60 years prior to the Civil War, to restrict rights. The 14th Amendment gives equal protection of the law and grants due process of the law. And with the 15th Amendment, black men gained citizenship and right to vote. This caused a split in the women's movement, that abolitionist movement and women's movement, because they felt that the compromise, giving all men the right to vote, but still excluding women, was undermining their cause. During the period of Reconstruction, we had the 1875 Civil Rights Act that was passed by Congress based upon the 14th Amendment and the 13th and the 15th, but primarily the 14th, where remember Congress has the power to enforce on each of those. So in 1875 they passed this, but courts ignored it. They still upheld discriminatory Jim Crow laws. Supreme Court is going to agree in the civil rights cases in 1883. South is going to use poll taxes, white-only primaries, and literacy tests to block voting. Okay. At that point, we go through a period of time. Where these cases are reinforced, and every southern state has these Jim Crow laws put in place. And what's important about them is this. It wasn't that you could discriminate, that you could separate. It was mandatory that you did so. It was illegal to have a school that had children who were both black and white. It was illegal to allow both black and white people into your restaurant. It was illegal to marry someone who was not white if you were white, who was not black if you were black. The NAACP is going to form during this period of time and start legislating at a state level. They start working at a state level to try to change this. I would give you guys a literacy test, but you can't. So we'll maybe do that later. The women's movement's going to get reinvigorated at the same time too. Okay? And so women are going to start agitating for suffrage again, the right to vote. This is primarily going to be led by two different groups. One is a more conservative group who have been working at the state level, working slowly with Congress. And one is a more radical group. This group is led by Lucy Burns. And have any of you ever seen Iron Jawed Angels? It's an HBO movie, so you know it's good, right? Two of you, right? Okay. There's a love story. Thumbs up for me.
It doesn't develop.
It doesn't matter, right? It's not the point. The point is this. These women put into place the teachings of Henry David Thoreau in terms of civil disobedience. They protested. They lobbied. They were thrown in jail. They were beaten. They were force-fed. And the result of it was this. In the background, you have the conservative group who's working very hard, talking to the president, talking to Congress about how there needs to be a constitutional amendment. And in the foreground, or this one on here, in the background, you have a very clear spotlight on what's happening to these women who dare to protest. As a result, what happened?
It gets passed.
The amendment granting women the right to vote passed. Okay? There's kind of this scene in the movie, which is a bit apocryphal, but I enjoy it, alright? In which it's the last state, right? Because in order to amend the Constitution, how much of Congress, the House of Congress have to say yes?
2/3.
2/3 of each. And then how many states? 3/4. And so this state is necessary. And there's this deciding vote. And he gets a note from his mother. And he changes it. I raised you better than this. So we see that these movements are going on, right? At the same time, and we've talked a little bit about this, and we'll talk more about it in a bit. Can you do the center one too? At the same time, you also have, as Professor Patterson pointed out at the beginning of class in that lecture on limits of government, the Chinese immigration is stopped. Asian immigration is limited, generally. There's massive discrimination against those of Asian descent. Latino workers are also facing this kind of discrimination. Usually seasonal workers that are coming up from Mexico and then going back. This is a test. Draw a line around the number or letter of the sentence. What are you going to do? Draw a line around the number or letter of the sentence. What are you going to do? Well, I would circle 1, right? But that's a circle. Is that a line? Unclear. Draw a line under the last word in this line. What are you going to underline? Line. Or is it word? Because word is the last word in this line. Cross out the longest word in this line. Also, what is a cross? Do you exit? Do you do it up and down? Is it longest? Is it word? Shortest word? Is it A? Or is it word? Circle the first letter of the alphabet in this line. The A in alphabet. In the space below, draw 3 circles, one inside the other. Above the letter X, make a small cross, which gets us back to what's a cross. Draw a line through the letter below that comes earliest in the alphabet. What are you going to draw a line through? C. Draw a line through the letter below that comes last in the alphabet. In the space below, write the word noise backwards and place a dot over what would have been its second letter should it have been written forward. What are you going to do? And what's backwards? You mean you have to write it all backwards? Or do you have to write just the letters forward? Right? And then that dot over that O. And then, give your age in days. You do it. Now. Give me your age and date. You have 10 minutes to take this test. Just one question, you're out. Give your age and date. Give your age and date. As I said, Plessy versus Ferguson is going to ensure the Jim Crow laws are in place across the South. And they require racial separation in schools, restaurants, hotels, public transportation, theaters, restrooms, and in marriage. So, I have a poll for you. Supposing I have my phone. Your favorite non-Bill of Rights amendment. And after that, I'll take 10 minutes. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay, the 13th Amendment does what?
Ban slavery.
Abolish slavery. 14th, rights of citizens in the states are protected. 15th, all men can vote. 19th, all men and women can vote. This slide got about a minute and 51 seconds. Can you guys see that? Obviously, this is very fast, you guys. I'd love for you to take a civil rights class. You can teach them, okay? This is American federal government, so I'm just giving you an idea of the laws and structures and where we are today, okay? This is the University of Oklahoma. This is Annabelle Elizabeth Fisher. She's from Chickasha. She graduated from Langston. And she applied to the University of Oklahoma Law School. And when she applied, the president of the University of Oklahoma, because the law school wasn't quite separated at that point, it was actually just right there in the old law barn, right? So the president of the University of Oklahoma specifically in his letter denying her admission wrote, "You look to be very qualified for this. However, due to your race, you cannot be admitted." Why did he do that?
So we could get sued?
So he could get sued. Because the Board of Regents had prohibited it. And so his hands were tied. And so he did not say, "Sorry, not qualified." He didn't say, "Can't be admitted. Sorry, we're cool." He said, "You can't come because you're black." And so he could be sued. So the university could be sued. We have here, just behind her shoulder, does anybody know who that is? My second favorite Supreme Court, no, sorry, third favorite Supreme Court justice of all time. Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was a attorney for the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. Okay? And so the NAACP starts using, because they have run against so many walls in state legislatures, they start using a court strategy. Thurgood Marshall is a lead attorney. And he starts arguing in every single one of these cases the same exact thing. He says, segregation is inherently unequal. It's inherently unequal. Because it denies to Black Americans equal access to the opportunities of America. It creates segregation in finances. It causes emotional segregation or emotional damage. It causes a permanent underclass. This is his argument in every single one of these cases. In this case, the Supreme Court says, well, the thing is we're lawyers. And so we understand that the University of Oklahoma is the flagship school of law in the state of Oklahoma. And we also understand that in order to practice law, you need to know each other. And one of the ways you know each other is you went to law school together. I had a case recently, a couple of years ago, where the DA for an area in Oklahoma is an old law school friend of mine. And I called him and I said, hey, my client is a victim of this person. Throw the book at him. Take this seriously on the domestic abuse. And he said, I'll make a note. And they did. They went to trial, they went to jury trial. And I told them in particular, because this person's status was very high, to be really aware of the pressure of that. But I was able to have a conversation with him because we sat next to each other in torts.
What type of law did you practice?
I practice family law primarily, some constitutional law. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that, probably not. We'll get to judiciary. I studied international law, but just so you guys know, if you want to go to law school, you end up practicing what you get your job in. Right? So choose your jobs carefully, or apply for your jobs carefully. In 1954, if you'll notice the difference in time there are several cases that go between. One more at the University of Oklahoma, one at the University of Texas. But in between, Thurgood Marshall keeps making the same argument. And in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court listens and says the intellectual, psychological, and financial damage that befell Black Americans precludes as finding of equality under separate but equal doctrine. Overturning Plessy versus Ferguson, specifically overturning Plessy versus Ferguson in 1954, and that was 1897. The arc of the moral universe is long. Separate is inherently unequal. In 1955, segregated systems in Brown versus 2, they say, hey, why haven't you done anything? Do it now. They must be dismantled with all deliberate speed. And so, you have President Eisenhower sending the National Guard into Little Rock. Right? This is where I should put up my selfie of me in front of Little Rock High School. But I didn't. I'll put it on film. Because I think you should see it. How many of you ever seen Little Rock High School? 1, 2, 2. Little Rock Central High School, 2 of you kids. Tell me about it.
It wasn't that nice. It was just kind of small. I was only there for like 1 minute.
Then I don't think you saw it. Because it's a castle. It's a fortress. The stairs to get up are twice as big as me going up here. There's a reflecting pond in front of it. If you want to go up those stairs to go to school, it's not walking through a little door. It's intimidating. intimidating. I was intimidated by it. I was into a slogan. Right? We see that out of that, in the aftermath of that, through these court cases, right? The movement begins. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Rosa Parks, who I'm sure you all know who it is. Yes? But I want to tell you about her anyway, because this is a bus. And there's a string that goes right here. And there's a little placard that says colored right here for the beat seat. For the beat seat. And she and 3 other friends sat in this row. Are you guys? And she sat here. But the front row is filled up. And the bus was full. And so, the bus driver took the sign and moved it back a row to get up. And her friends did. And she didn't. He said, "You'll be arrested." And she said, "I know." I want you to know that 1, it's hard to stand up for something you believe in. And 2, it's harder when the people that were there with you can't do it. And I'm not blaming them. They had children. They couldn't go to jail. And she couldn't go to jail either. But she did. You want to talk about courage? That's courage. So there's this young preacher. There's a person who had been leading some smaller movements. And he wasn't available. He was a bigger name. A young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. He was available. And so he led the Montgomery bus boycott. People came down with cars, people ride shared, people brought buses to drive people around. And for 1 full year, 1 full year, not a week, not 3 days, 1 full year, this boycott went on. Until, was there a policy change? Did the law change? No. The bus system was going out of business. And so they changed their own policy because they needed money. A lot of times, these boycotts, these sit-ins, are aimed specifically at the business itself to make them change. And it hits them where it hurts in the economy. Hey, Eric, give your phone.
Yes.
Could you do a sentence real quick?
Yeah.
During this period of time, there are freedom rides, marches. Again, people are acting in civil disobedience.
Image is live.
Dr. Martin Luther King is going to model his philosophy after Henry David Thoreau, Lucy Burns, Alice Paul, who was talking about earlier. I didn't say Alice Paul, I said Lucy Burns. And then Mahatma Gandhi is going to use it in the 1950s too, following World War II. You guys have read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, and I'm bringing it back to you now, and specifically, I'm talking about these 4 steps of a nonviolent campaign. And I always ask this question on an exam, which is Friday, as a reminder. You collect the facts, you find out what's actually going on. right? You don't jump to conclusions. What's actually happening here? And then you negotiate. Hey, this doesn't seem right. Can we do something about it? And if negotiation fails, then you have to make yourself right. Because you cannot go into this with any hate or anger. Why? Because it's going to hurt your cause. And you have to be prepared for what happens, which could be death, being attacked by dogs, being attacked by fire hoses, being arrested, torture. And then you engage in direct action that confronts the issue. Alright. In 1964, we have the Civil Rights Act that is going to bar discrimination in public facilities, private businesses, employment, and education. They're going to provide for federal intervention under the 14th Amendment. Remember the 14th Amendment? It's laid dormant at this point for about 100 years. They're going to create the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It's going to apply to race, color, religion, origin, and sex. Civil Rights Act, any guess who it benefits the most? Any guess in terms of socioeconomic well-being, who benefits the most from the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Middle-class white women. That's who benefits the most. Everybody does better. It's helpful for everyone. But it's middle-class white women who have the biggest step in terms of their socioeconomic status. White Southerners are going to be very opposed to the act. And you're going to start seeing some votes for Republicans at in national elections. You're going to see the Republican rhetoric. We'll talk about party turnover, the Southern strategy employed by Richard Nixon. States' rights, nullification become an issue again. But state imposed, de jure means by law, ends at that point. Okay? De facto, in fact segregation, not so much. 10 years after Brown, less than 1% of African American children in the South attended fully graded school. 10 years later, after Little Rock. But over time, there's been a greater equality as a result. I don't think I can finish this today either. The women's rights movement, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Also, the rights of Latino Americans. We're going to talk about Asian Americans, Americans with disabilities. Also, gay, lesbian, and bisexual, transgender rights. We'll talk about all of that later on. Until Wednesday, go to the back door. Over.